All right, so here we are. We're going to add this top piece in. And so I just collapsed an edge, two edges there because I actually didn't need both those. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on putting in edges that will help me connect one piece to the other. So we've gone over this in other tutorials, but this is obviously getting to a point where like they're much more complex objects now. So sometimes you'll see it'll take me a little bit to kind of look at something and get it figured out in my head what exactly I want to do. And right now I'm just moving these edges around so that I know that they can tie into the other mesh. And sometimes I have to add an edge in like so. And I know I'm going to, around the base there, I'm going to kind of have a cut that I cut around. So I know how that's going to go. Here now I know that I want to basically tie this together. So almost like it's like how you would think if you had a cylinder and then you scale it in and then extruded it up again, So I'm going to basically just tie this in almost like it's like a, just like you're almost like you're capping a hole in a sense. But I'm just cutting towards the center, and trying to hit the edges where I will have those connected to. So like right there. And eventually, because there's like a different distribution of edges, I'm actually going to add in some edges to the larger piece, even on the curve side. And when you do something like that, when you start messing with like kind of cylindrical curve pieces, you need to redistribute all your edges. Like when I was just sliding the edge there, you need to redistribute them really, really evenly. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this original piece that I made that was just the half piece, and I'm going to make a high poly version of it that I can smooth so that I can make sure that I'm matching it perfectly, and that it will, my distribution will be perfectly curved around it. So now that's all I'm doing here is I'm going to run these really tight edge loops in here and just make sure that when I hit 3 in the keyboard, it holds tight corners, but it also is smooth. So I can see exactly like a smooth mesh that's going to just sit under my other mesh as a guide. You could snap to it in certain situations. You may need to snap to it. But in this case, I'm just using it as a guide because as a visual reference. And you'll see later, because I'll go into like wireframe mode and so now that's what it looks like smooth. So you can see it looks nice and smooth, and but it still has these tight corners because I wanted to kind of match corners wise. It's a little bit lower, so I had to like raise it up a little bit. So I went ahead and moved my pivot here, and I was going to snap the pivot, but I just ended up like moving it so it was right by the corner. So there you go. So now you can see the two meshes are basically coinciding with each other, almost sharing the same space. And then when I start moving edges around now, I can distribute them and just look at the underlying mesh to make sure I'm putting them in the right spot. You just want to make sure like the segments are around the same length as you go around like cylinders. So if you do add in edges like this, I put on my edge flow, by the way, right there. So it pops it out a little bit. But so now I'm going to slide that over, and then as you're doing that, the slide will sometimes it'll like average the edges in a little bit. So then you have to go and move them back out so they're matching the curvature. But you just want to make sure all these segments are basically the same size. So right now, like these segments are too close together, so they'll pinch. You'll get like a pinch look when you start to smooth this thing. And this one's too close to the other one, so I'm moving it up like there. And you can see how it just averaged and like kind of almost like dips into the mesh a little bit. You'll see it again in a second. But so I'm going to go ahead and just like try to slide some stuff back and forth here. I actually grabbed some edges I didn't need, so I was just deselecting. So here I am. So I'm using the edge slide tool in the mesh tools, and you just middle mouse drag back and forth, and it's good for balancing out edges as you slide them back. Excuse me, as you slide them back and forth, they start to average their distance. But the problem is though is they dip into the mesh. So that's what I'm hiding all my other meshes and changing the layers it's on, so I can see that nice curve mesh underneath my mesh. And then I'm just moving the edges out a little bit so that they're basically like they're the same distance from that smooth mesh. So I want the little vertices that are at the apex there to like be the same distance, and then have kind of like a tangent happen with the edges that are going to the next set of vertices on the top. So on the curvature of the top. So here you can see like these two middle pieces are too they're too large of a distance. So like I'm closing that gap and just basically balancing these out. And I'm not measuring. I'm just kind of eyeballing. I mean, I'm measuring in my head, if you will. I'm just taking an educated guess, and you can look at it later. And if it's a blaring mistake, you'll notice it. So I'm just basically trying to balance these out. If you want to be really persnickety about it, you could make another cylinder that's that many segments and like bring it over there and try to see how there it's distributed. Use it as a guide, but it usually just looking at it and trying to figure that out is fine. So here now I'm just sort of going through a thought process of like, how do I want to tie these together? Like which edges should go to where? So I'll put some cuts in, and sometimes I end up changing these things a little bit. Like as my process goes on, I'll realize, I'd probably be better off if this cut went here instead of here or something like that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm playing the video at twice the speed. So you don't have to watch my thought process. You can just hear me narrate it. So anyway, here, so now I'll add in some edges so that they can tie going around this way. And sometimes I won't even like put the edge all the way around. Sometimes I'll just, like right now I'm just doing a connect and I'm just going to do a partial connect. I was trying to use the slide thing, but I just decided I was just going to use the move slide tool and be easier. So obviously this will have to be balanced out too. I can't leave these edges too close to each other on a curved part like that, because you'll get a pinch look. But I also am not worried about making it perfect all at once. I really kind of want to tie the mesh together first and get that figured out, and then I can go back in and redistribute the edges. So here I'm sort of realizing I can use a few of the edges that were already on the mesh to start establishing kind of like my border edge that I'm going to cut around. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut around this piece, and then I'm going to delete all of the polygons that are in the middle, because I want a nice little chamfer. When I do a bridge, I'll bridge the two together, and then I want that little chamfer so it looks like it's machined, which is realistic. So here I'm just moving some of these edges that I could use, and then I'll just cut. So now I'm actually starting to cut around the actual whole object, and then I'll come back in and do some collapses, and then remove edges and stuff like that. So I just cut down there, and here I'll just remove some edges, collapse some stuff. Sometimes when I collapse, my alignment gets thrown off, and I'll go ahead and just put another cut in, like right here. I just decided, okay, I'll just cut another one here, and then just remove the edge that wasn't in the right spot. Some of the same stuff's going on here too. And get rid of those, because these all of the pieces of the mesh that are going behind that behind the second object that I'm trying to join in, those are all going to be deleted. So I'm not really worried about it too much, like what they look like. So I just cut into it. So if you've watched the cutting holes tutorial, this is basically straight out of that. Like if you've done those exercises, you'll know exactly how I do stuff like this. And the thought process, it breaks it down into like a more simple step. And so here, I'll select these and then just delete them, just so don't have to look at them anymore. And some of these on the inside I can get rid of as well. I just make sure I'm not deleting anything I need. So I bring the object back. I do a lot of isolate select. That was partially what I was doing, just Control 1. You have to select it on the object level. If you have, you could select just parts of the mesh and isolate those too, but usually I'm just working on the whole object. So here, the flat areas like this are the easiest to add extra geometry to, because you do have to distribute just to make it look good, but you don't have to worry about like a curvature because it's just a flat, 180-degree curve, if you will. So here I'm just figuring out like, okay, where do I need to cut to, and how can I tie this to the rest of the mesh? But eventually I just usually just end up cutting like I'm doing right here, and then I'll delete the inner part, and then I'll work with the topology later. So I'll just delete those. It's kind of like the less you have to, if you get rid of stuff that you don't really need, it's easier to analyze your mesh, I feel like, at least for me. So if I delete those inner things, then they're not, it's almost like it's easier to tell what I need to do next. So here I know I've got to somehow tie these number of edges in. So I'm going to do a cut like that. I still have my edge flow on, so I had to shut that off and then fix where that edge was because it moved on me from the edge flow. And so, yeah, again, this is me examining. I look at both sides. I'm trying to figure out where things will tie together. I know this has to come up like this. And then I know I can get rid of these faces. And then do my next figuring. So I know there's an edge that needs to be connected there. And then to get rid of that Engon, I can just bring this over here because I know I have this other piece that I just put here. And of course now I'm actually going to be able to work this around here because I've got an Engon right here. And this is an area, this was one of the more tricky areas was not exactly this part here, but just below that part there. I had to figure out how to tie mesh in. I accidentally deleted a face in the back when I was deleting stuff. So, but that's something I'm not worried about. Like that only takes a second to fix and do it later. So again, this is me sort of analyzing my mesh, figuring out what I'm going to need to do. I'm adding even another loop in there. And then I'll adjust the spacing here because these things are way too tight together. So again, you get to watch me just analyzing. Maybe if I talk too much, it'll be annoying. So, okay, so here I'm going to start cutting around the base. I change this a little bit, like I do on the side that I just put the first mark for the cut on. I do change that later, but on the other side, I pretty much leave it the same. So I cut from here, and then I turn the corner, and then once I do that, I can just get rid of that piece right there. And then over here, I really didn't want to mess with the curve that's going down, so I went ahead and put a cut in like that. It's a little bit tight, but I was trying to figure out like, okay, how can I do this without, messing with this curve, because the curve's the same on both sides. I'm going in here and I'm deleting the bottom part just because, again, like I said, it helps me think better or analyze on the parts that I do need to cut better. And so now I'm looking at this and saying, okay, well, there's these edges here that are in the front. They have to tie into something. So I've got these front edges on this mesh, and I'm going to have to add some other edges in. And then I'm going to have to basically do like a reduction because I don't want to keep all these extra edges going all the way through the object. So I have a reduction video that shows basically similar techniques to what you see here, but this is like putting it into action. The reduction video is just examples and showing them kind of in a clinical form. This is actually like kind of the live form of how it actually works out when you're working on a real project. So here's like I'm just debating like if I need to put an extra edge in here, or can I slide this all the way over? And I end up eventually putting an extra edge in. On both pieces, actually, I think I put an extra edge in, so an edge right there, and then I put like another edge on the other piece. But part of the reasoning was I want the mesh to be balanced, and I don't want like huge, gaps in the polygon size. I just I just like the way it looks. It looks better with the balanced mesh. And there's reasons why you might do that too. I've talked about it in some of my other videos. If you're doing like VFX, or you need stuff to flex. You got to use deformers. Okay, so here I decided to put a cut up like so, to match up with some of these other edges, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and turn that corner there, and then just redistribute the edges a little bit. I don't spend too much time on that yet. That's kind of something in this project. I'll do more of that at the end, where I'll just go ahead and make it look all balanced. But what I ended up doing here is I ended up putting a cut into it. So I decided like, okay, I'm going to put a cut into here, and then I'm going to go ahead and detach the edges and basically move these two things so that they match up. So I did go into the curve a little bit. So here's where I'm detaching the edges. So just do a detach. So now the verts are free. So if I go ahead and grab the one vert in the corner there, I can just move it over, and then I can remerge it. So there's like 3 verts there. I don't know why there was 3. There should have been 2, but for some reason there's 3. And then here I'll just grab these and I'll move these in a little bit and then merge that vert there in the bottom. So just it messed with that little curve a little bit, but in the end I can just adjust it and put my reference mesh underneath it, make sure it's lined up properly. So here I'm still I'm still working on this. I go back. Sometimes I'll jump off of something and like kind of let it brew in the back of my mind, and then I'll jump to something else and then go back to it. I do that in my 2D art stuff too. Like I'll be drawing something and just decide to jump onto something else and then come back to it. So here what I'm doing is I'm testing to see, okay, how much does this curvature change if I get rid of that edge? Because I'm trying to not add in extra edges if I don't have to. But I made a decision, like I do actually try to do this where I kind of merge into the middle of the two so that they're try to get it like a balance. But then eventually I decide, nah, I'm just going to put an extra edge in just because I actually realized that I missed an edge. Later I'll realize that I missed an edge on the other side. So now I'm like, oh yeah, this will work. And then I go to the other side and go, oh wait, I had an extra edge that I didn't address. And when I address it, I can tie it into that edge on the other side. So you'll see what I'm saying in a second if it doesn't make any sense. So here I'm just straightening these out a little bit. Just tidying, I guess. It's not really necessary to even get into that too much at this point. So this was my solution. I'm like back at the same solution that I had before. So it was like stupid. Like I can't make up my mind here. But when I realized that I missed an edge, then I go, oh wait, my extra, yeah, this is where I realized it. I'm like, oh wait, I have an extra edge that I totally forgot about. So then I realized, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this edge down below my reductions that I just did on this face that we're looking at, and I'm going to turn a corner and then come over here all the way over, and then I'm going to tie that back up to the other side, the same that ties into the same thing on the cylinder on the separate piece that we haven't joined yet. So that's going to basically match up, and then I'll add this extra edge in, and that means I can move this closer again so that the bevel's the same, and then I can just go ahead and just tie this together. And there we go. And so now, to me, that looks much, much better. So it's balanced and it's all quad, so yay. All right. So I get to a point here where I'm going to delete out the faces here around the edge because I want that bevel to be in there, or that chamfer. I want like the smoothness, the nice smoothness to be there. There's the fillet. I think I'm like using the wrong words. Fillet. I think it's fillet. Anyway, so I deleted off the bottom. I made a mistake too because I actually grabbed some side polys that I needed. But what I realized here is that looking at the reference, this piece was like something was off. And I'll show the reference in a second because the reference, the little circular bottom right there does not dip in. You can see it right there. It doesn't actually go into there. So I was adjusting it going, okay, I got to pull this up a little bit. And I finally realized one of the problems is this piece was just a little bit too big. Especially the tube that we're sort of looking at that goes in the X direction was a little bit too big. And I'll pull the reference mesh out soon and have that realization. And I'm not sure how I did that, because I know I built it on that reference mesh, but we all make mistakes, and that was just a mistake that I made. So now here I'm trying to pull up the bottom a little bit, but keep like a nice distribution of edges and all quads. And something about cutting the bottom, but then I decide that I'm just going to do a cut all the way across the bottom with my cut tool, which is what I'm going to do right here. Just hold shift and cut all the way in bottom, and then I'm going to check it to make sure I didn't cut off stuff that I needed, or cut into the parts that I needed. And I literally was like 0.1 millimeter away from cutting it in the wrong spot. So, but I was able to keep it. So, anyway, so I'm just getting rid of those, and then I delete this little piece here, and then I've got some target welding to do here because I've made n-gons. But you can see I deleted these edges, or these faces here on the side that I need, so I'm going to have to rebuild those. So I just grab these edges on both sides and just hold shift and drag. And then I just need to merge them with the other piece and then flatten them out. I'm trying to snap them. For some reason, I couldn't get my snap to work right. Like every so often, Maya will have like this thing where something will stop working. I don't know why. But anyway, I found a workaround, so it was fine. I'm saving at this point. I just felt like it was a good spot to save. So here I'm going to grab all these bottom edges and just make sure that they're straight with the front. So I'm just going to straighten them out and then just snap it right to that front vert. And so straighten it and then just snap it to the front vert so they're all even. And then right here I'm just going to pull that up a little bit just so it's not so tight. And now we're getting closer, but I still haven't shrunk this thing down. It's a little bit too big. And I'll find that out when I get that reference mesh out. So I'm going to start bridging, but then that's when I realized that, like, wait, why is this thing so, sunken into this mesh? So I do some bridging here, and then I looked at it, and then I realized, oh, that's not right. So this is where I start pulling the reference mesh out, and I'm like, okay, it's a little bit off. When you're shrinking something like this, I tried two methods. One is just using the scale, obviously, but that can cause issues when you're trying to scale things in a certain direction, and I don't know. It's challenging. I ended up using some transform, the transform tool, which kind of it'll move verts along their normals. So it scales a bit differently than a regular scale tool. You'll see in a little bit. So this is where I'm realizing that the top of this thing is going way too high, and yeah, it's just a mistake I made. So I'm going to just basically scale it a little bit and then try to work with what I have. And in the end, I think it turned out good, so I'm okay with it. But, at this point right here, I would rather it have been perfect, but maybe for teaching. So this is a transform tool, by the way. For the teaching purposes, maybe it's better that I made mistakes like this, so you can see, whoever's watching can see that, these things happen. So it's still a little bit low, so I'm still going to have to lift it up a little bit, still have to scale it a little bit. And I want to just scale the one tube that faces the X direction. So I'm just looking at, can I just scale this one part? So I changed the soft select, which you just hit B for soft select. I changed it to just surface, because if you have it on volume, it'll grab any mesh that's within the volume, and so it grabs both meshes. So I just want it to be surface, and so now I'm just checking it again against the mesh and seeing what can I get away with. And now I'm deciding I'm going to select this tube that's going in the X direction, primarily just select it and it by itself, so that I can go ahead and just scale and see what I can come up with. Still got the soft select on, but I think I don't know if I turned that off yet, but just be careful with the soft select because you don't want to grab stuff that is unnecessary. So speaking of grabbing things unnecessary, if your scale tool comes like that, looks like that, then you definitely got something grabbed that you don't need to. I think I'm transforming the vertices again here. Yeah, so I'm just pushing them against their normals. And see how they shrink in? But you can get problems with that too because you can get some weird curves. Which I did. I can tell that there's like kind of a weird curve there. But I'm also not afraid of it because I know I have my meshes that I can snap to later to fix it. So at this point, I'm just trying to get everything joined together. So now I'm feeling better about this as I'm looking at this. I'm going, okay, that looks a little bit better. It's getting closer to being balanced. I'm moving these around just a little bit, just so they're not like pinched. And now I'm just going to move the whole thing up a little bit and make sure that it's level with the bottom part. So there we go. And so before I go ahead and start merging them, I straighten out all these verts on the bottom and then snap them down to the other piece. Snap that up, anything that's not quite there. So it'll look good when it's all put together. And then here, same thing. Those are some of these pieces just somehow got off. And I think I'm ready. I'm pretty close to being ready to start bridging. And usually what I'll do is I'll start bridging like 1 or 2 parts and then I can grab larger parts. Oh, I scaled this a little bit too because I felt like it was a little bit too wide. So I'm scaling it a little bit closer and then I'm just going to go and manually adjust a couple edges. And of course, all this stuff can be worked with later too. Like sometimes it's easier to get the topology figured out and then work on the little minutia of the spacing later. So here I'm pulling that closer. I felt like it was too wide of a space. And here's where I start actually bridging again. So I'm pretty confident now that the bridging should work right. And then I grab the whole section there and then just deselect the little edges and then I can bridge again. Now I know I've got some triangles and stuff in here and n-gons, but it'll work. They'll get worked out as I'm working on it. There was a tricky spot that took me a bit to figure out how to work it out. And I'm sure because this tutorial is just this piece, and then I'll do a different tutorial for the final piece, and then we'll call it done for these tutorials. But I'm sure with the final piece there'll be some tricky parts too. I think I finally eventually I get annoyed with that hole in the back, and I do fill it, but. So here I figure, okay, I've got to tie one around the outside here. Once you're off that curved area and it's flat, you get a lot more leeway. Now I just leave that there for now. I'm not even worried about going all the way around. I just want to get this worked out, and then I'll go and fix things and make sure that they're just right. So here, just joining more edges. And same thing. So more bridging. I must have grabbed the wrong edge because it bridged like inside the piece. So I'm feeling pretty good at this point. I'm noticing that there's a few triangles and stuff that I want to work out, but I'm feeling pretty good about where I'm at. And sometimes I'll hit 3 and just check in and see, okay, this is looking pretty good. Making sure there's no blaring problems. Now here's another spot where I think I didn't work enough edges into here. Like I kind of just neglected to work that out. Sometimes when I go to use the cut tool, like it just stops working for putting edge loops in. And this is one of those times I wanted to put an edge loop in, but it wouldn't work. So it'll work for just like the regular cut, but it doesn't put the edge loops in for some reason. It's like it won't recognize certain edges. It's probably where you should delete the history and save your file. Just some some warnings, you know. I didn't actually have anything crash, so that's nice. But yeah, here's where I got sick of that. Finally, I was like, I'm just gonna cap this hole. I think it was because I was thinking of running something through there, and I had to consider capping it. And finally, I moved that piece out because I'm like, yeah, I need you out of here. I gotta work. So here's where I start like working another edge into here, which in the end I would have probably needed anyway. Sometimes I have had moments where I've got all of the mesh worked out and there's like one triangle I just have the hardest time getting. It just seems like I can't get rid of this one triangle. It just keeps popping up. This sort of happened here, but not too bad. What I had to do is I had to sort of work the triangle down lower, and there's ways to do that. Eventually, like, I'll end up kind of like joining different edges so that the triangle moves to a different spot, and then I'm able to tie it with another piece. That's coming. But here I am like trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to work these two triangles out? So I'm just going to put a connection in there, and then now those are all quads, right? But I don't believe I ended up leaving that because now that I'm narrating, so I sometimes I forget exactly what I did. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I changed that later. Here I couldn't figure out another way to get rid of this n-gon, so I decided, okay, I'll just run another edge around, and what I was trying to do is tie it into that triangle somehow that was on the other side. So I'm like looking at where the triangle is, or could I run this a different way? I definitely don't want the triangle in that little beveled area right there, the little fillet area there, or fillet. So I want to move that triangle off of that area if I can. So the way I do that is I ended up doing that, and then the triangle was more on the outside, although it was still wasn't perfectly correct yet. And here's where my cut tool is not working. That's what I was talking about. So I had to like manually cut. Like, okay, if I manually cut, it works. But if I, and actually, I think I was trying something here, and it didn't actually work, and so I ended up getting rid of this. And you know, the more you model, yeah, sometimes you just have to try stuff, and maybe the solution doesn't work. But I'm not spending a lot of time. You know, you're only spending like a minute or something to see if you can get this to work out. I wasn't really happy with the way it looked, but I figure it out eventually. So here I'm gonna go ahead and just do a collapse and just collapse those together. And then I'm just going to move this back down so it holds the curvature. And I'm not checking it right away. Well, I do have my front faces, so I do snap it to my front faces right there. Like that front vert is in the right spot. It didn't get moved. But sometimes like I'll check it later. I'll just get the topology right now and then put that other mesh underneath. And so here I'm like, I realize like, oh, I made some extra, edges. Problematic edges and stuff like that, and so again I'm trying to figure out where these are all going to go, because obviously if I have a triangle there I have to tie it into something, and then I made this this little area here was pinching kind of weird. And we're in thought pattern mode here. Just looking at stuff. It's not evenly distributed yet, but I'm just going to take a look. So it looks good. That's the important thing. It's not finished, but it looks good. Technically, you could terminate like on an, if you're on a flat face like that, like this, and you just went ahead and smooth, it'll actually, if you had an n-gon there, it'll work out that n-gon. But I like to finish it all off so it's you know, you can have your lightweight mesh and it looks good. And I don't want to, you know, it's for example, you know, like I'm showing an example. You know, um, there's having a flat face with an Engon that you're going to smooth later. Yeah, the Engon will get worked out. But um, if I'm like trying to teach somebody how to do this stuff, I don't want to just leave stuff like that. Even though I know I could, because I do know this thing is going to be smooth. So here I am, I'm just doing the slide edge to distribute, and I tried to do it there. It didn't work. So like it works a little bit differently with verts than it does with edges. Sometimes it works fine with verts, but it just depends. So I need to, you know, redistribute that, and I'm getting closer here. So like I'm liking what I'm seeing. I think I just have like that one triangle, and I'm trying to figure out like where am I going to work this thing out. And sometimes I'll just jump and start redistributing verts because like I don't know what I'm gonna do. So here's where I was talking about. I mentioned this earlier. Like I start tying different edges together and making like basically like making different edge flow all together. Like just kind of moving. In this way, you can kind of move triangles down to a different area. So I'm just sort of redistributing stuff and trying to figure out, well, okay, how can I move this triangle out of there, and what can I do to fix this? So now right there, I've got a quad. So I fixed that, but then I move the triangle down lower. So the question is like, oh, well, wait a second, I have this piece right here. I realized like, oh yeah, I left that one there. Now let me bring it over and see how I can tie this together. See if I can work this out with this new piece that I'm bringing in. So now where can that connect? And so I do this like this means nothing. I was just like I'm just gonna run an edge there. But what I end up doing, this I mentioned this earlier too. Sometimes you just get rid of everything and look at it fresh. So I kind of just was like, okay, let me just delete a bunch of stuff and look at this fresh. And that actually worked. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that's the way I end up solving is when I just have to get rid of everything and sort of just delete it and then look at it fresh or, you know, try a new edge flow. So here I'm like, okay, I've got this. We just got this one part here. What are we going to do? And then the solution eventually presents itself. And then, so I realize I have another triangle down here, right? So when I'm looking at this, I'm going, okay, where's this going to? Okay, I can't collapse that to get rid of it. That's not going to work out. So that triangle is got to be my solution. So here I'm gonna tie up to here, and then I'm thinking, okay, what if I just cut these out like this, and eventually we get this worked out. So now we have one Engon. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and start changing things and seeing. So I realized that was not the answer. Oh, what if I just connect that? Oh, there you go. It's done. That was the solution. That looks funky, so let's move this back. You know, so I haven't, like I said, I'll get into that more later when I'm finishing off, like just distributing everything nicely, making it look nice and even. But yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it, because when you now look at it smooth, everything's quads, and it looks good. Oh, forgot one thing. Boom, connect. So there you go. And that's going to be what the model will look like when you actually add that extra geometry in there. So great. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.